Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. I'm Bob Balderson, and I'm certainly delighted to serve as your worship associate today and to welcome you fully into our beautiful space. We welcome people of all genders, sexuality, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you are bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We welcome all of you. We extend a special welcome to each guest among us. Guests are invited to come early on another Sunday and drop into the Inquirers session at 10 a.m. in the parlor to learn more about Unitarian Universalism and our church in a smaller, casual gathering. We invite our guests to fill out a welcome card located in the pew rack in front of you and to drop it in the offering plate later in the service. You can also pick up a welcome packet at the back of the sanctuary. Hearing assist devices and Braille hymnals are available at the rear of the sanctuary, and a fragrance-free area is located in the first few pews at the right side of the sanctuary. If you are a visiting family, including children or youth, please join the children's recessional after the time for all ages and head across the hall to the common room. There you will be greeted by someone who will orient you to religious education. Immediately following the service, everyone is invited for coffee and conversation in the common room across the hall. Again, my name is Bob, and you can find me at the Feast of Crispians table, which is on the back left side of the common room. As a way to engage at First Church, I invite everyone to explore the announcements insert in your order of service for the numerous opportunities available here. In particular, let me draw your attention to the following. The chronologically gifted group will be meeting today for its February potluck at 12:30 p.m. If you didn't come prepared with a dish to share, it's not a problem. Come anyway, there's always plenty of food. Today's program is entitled Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, will be presented by Janet Nortram. Don't miss this intriguing program. Adult spiritual development. Owning your religious past. Owning your religious past. How does your past shape your spiritual present? This class can help you reflect on your religious past, sorting out what to leave, what to bring into the present, and what to redefine. The 5-part sessions run March 5th through April 2nd and are facilitated by Jean Lowery and Gordy Mueller. Register online at the UU site, and you may also register at the religious education table at coffee hour. We need more hands. If you were not here last Sunday or have thought of another reason we need one another, the pledge team invites you to find their table at coffee hour and to add your hand to our collective wisdom of why we need one another. Of course, there will also be pledge cards at the table and a pledge team member to answer any questions you have about the 2019 We Need One Another to Take a Bold Step campaign. Please find details on these and more events in the announcement insert. Finally, please silence any electronic devices for the remainder of the service. Once again, I welcome you to First Church and invite you to join me in the unison reading of our mission, which is printed in your order of service, and let's say it like we mean it. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. There we go. Our guest speaker this morning is Kim Sweeney, and I'd like to welcome Kim. And Ms. Sweeney is a credentialed religious educator and the founder of Courageous Faith Consulting in East Hampton, Massachusetts. She worked for 7 years as the lead for faith formation on the UUA's New England regional staff team. Kim is the author of The Death of Sunday School and the Future of Faith Formation. She is a sought-after presenter and a workshop leader and has led programs across the United States and Canada. Let's welcome Kim. At this time, I invite Paul Eckert to come forward and light the chalice.
Our chalice lighting words this morning have been adapted by the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. Let us light our chalice for a deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, a deeper joy in this life we share. Thank you. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit and join as we sing hymn number 360, Here We Have Gathered. As we are a flexible people, I'm going to model some of that flexibility and change up our time for all ages a bit this morning. This morning, I want to share with you a pep talk for teachers and learners of all ages that was written by a 9-year-old boy named Robbie Novak. You may know him from YouTube as Kid President. It's time to get our learn on, and we've got a lot of learning to do. I don't know it all, but I do know a few things. We'll start with science. You're here, you take up space, you are matter, and you do matter. It's just science. Then there's history. We have to study it so that we don't repeat it. We can't just study history, though. We have to make history. And history is made by ordinary people. Ordinary people like you, like me, like Bob. The world's greatest thinkers, Confucius, Albert Einstein, Beyonce, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like the rest of us. You see, life is school, and you have to show up. You can't just sleep in all the time and can't be late all the time. It's like Walt Whitman said, YOLO. Except he didn't say that, but you would know that if you read the book, so take some time to read. If you want to change the world, you've got to know about it. What if Shakespeare didn't go to school? His plays would be even more confusing for the rest of us. Now, I've got a question for you. What are you teaching the world? Are you teaching the world how to be boring? How to make the world sad? No, I doubt it. You're teaching the world what it looks like to be awesome. No matter who you are, somebody is learning from you. Everyone in this space is a teacher, and everyone in this space is a student. So look for the awesome. Teachers see things every day. They see the not so fun things like the running in the hall and the talking when you're not supposed to, but they also see the person that we all can become someday. A writer, or a speaker, or Martin Luther King. So teachers keep teaching and students keep studenting. Here's to the teachers among us that see the awesome. If there is a teacher that inspires you, please let them know. This is for the teachers everywhere. The 3-year-olds that teach us about awe and wonder, the 10-year-olds that teach us the name of every star in the sky, the teenagers that teach us about community organizing, and the adults that teach us every day too. So share with them. We have got to make the world awesome. Somebody is learning from you. So go get your learn on, get your teach on, so that we can make history together. I'm going to invite our children and teachers to join in singing verse 1 of the hymn, More Love Somewhere. It's number 95 in your hymnal. And then they will proceed to their classes as the congregation continues to sing you on your way. Our meditation this morning is entitled, Here in This Space We Are Gathered, and it was written by Maureen Killoran. Here in this space we are gathered, called by our sense of urgency or duty or the longing for community, called to be together on this day, here in this space we are gathered, called to hold ourselves accountable to our values, to remind ourselves of those hopes and dreams and possibilities for which sometimes, in the rough and tumble world, it can be hard to hold on to belief. Here in this space, we are gathered, called to do our part in weaving a web of human community. Here in this space, some of us have come in pain. To those who are dealing with issues of health or grief or hardship, we pray, we wish for courage and healing. May we pause and hold gently all the concerns, named and unnamed, that are gathered in this room on this day.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Raleigh Hansen, and I'm here to talk to you today about my membership in First Church. I have been involved in a number of different things at First Church, and I have learned and grown in all of them. Today, I would like to share my experiences as an assistant and teacher in our children's religious education program. For me, it's been a chance to become more complete. I began volunteering in children's RE about 10 years ago. I grew up in a fairly large extended family, nieces and nephews a few years younger than me, and dozens of cousins. But I'd reached a point where I didn't have much contact with young people or children anymore.
And despite an earlier vow to never grow up, I had become an adult with certain profound and boring adult wisdom and adult ears that no longer were accustomed to the sounds of children. I felt the child inside disappearing. In my first year as an assistant for 7th and 8th graders, I was nervous and awkward and unsure of myself. Some of you may have heard this story before. One morning when I arrived, 2 of the 8th grade boys were sitting in the room at the table. They did not acknowledge me. I was kind of standing there when one of them said, "Raleigh's all right." And the other one agreed, "Yeah, Raleigh's okay." I was shocked and a little confused, as if I wasn't there. But the biggest feeling was a feeling of warm relief and gratitude. They let me know that they had accepted me regardless of how awkward I was or how nervous. The next year I taught 5th and 6th grade, and I learned more about Unitarian Universalism and other religions through our lesson plans. But there's a lot more to teaching or assisting than learning about new things or people. There's an experiential part of it. The interaction with children from 1st and 2nd grade and on through 8th grade is fun and challenging. It will offer you an opportunity to become, and I highly recommend it. For me, it has been a chance to become more complete, to engage in the practice of authenticity. For example, to completely lose control of a class, when one student preferred to lie on the floor under the table and somehow set off a chain reaction with all the students talking at once, one of them leaving her chair and wandering around the room, and not one paying attention to me or the lesson plan. I noticed 2 boys at the corner right next to me playing cards while I stood there, frustrated and dazed, trying to figure out how did all of this just happen. So I've gotten to make mistakes and feel a loss as to what to do. But I also have had the chance to learn and re-engineer and come back again, and I got help from our children's RE staff, the support of our religious education director, and my fellow teachers. And I've had the chance to kneel down with a young girl, I'll call Anna, to be on her level and gaze into her eyes when she was so anxious and overwhelmed that she couldn't sit still. I had the opportunity then to get her attention and ask, "What's going on with you? What is happening right now?" Communicating a variation of that ultimate question, "Who are you?" And sending a variation of the message, "I accept you, although you can't do this in my class." Children's RE is a chance to take risks and to be challenged, to let a child know that they are accepted and to hear them. As an example, to hear a 6-year-old explain, "The soul is where the heart thinks." Maybe that's where each of our authentic selves think as well. These are just some of the gifts that I have received from teaching here. Lynn, our membership stewardship coordinator, reminded me this is a stewardship testimonial and not Children's RE Sunday. And it's true. That's what this is, but this is what we do here. We create space to become, to take risks, to be challenged, to live into our values, and to help each other know that we are loved and accepted in all our messy, nervous becoming. This is why I support First Church, and I will be increasing my pledge this year. I encourage you to do the same, and thank you very much for listening. Let's fill the gap in our budget. And I'm still going to especially encourage you to take the chance to become in our Children's RE program. We do need your help. Thank you.
Every time I hear someone say, "The children are our future," track 9 of this particular album begins to play in my head. I hear the instantly recognizable sounds of that classic 1980s keyboard being played before the legendary powerhouse Whitney Houston breaks into song. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. You will be singing that for the rest of the weekend, and I do not apologize. I have been belting out that song in the shower and in the car for a few decades now, and I have to tell you, I think there's a tiny piece there where Whitney maybe had it wrong. Okay, I don't want to say the word wrong when we talk about Whitney Houston, but maybe more like not completely accurate. The children are our future as much as they are our present. They are here now, and they are doing truly amazing things. Last year, we witnessed the children lead the way as thousands upon thousands of children exited their schools all across the country to protest gun violence. 4 of the most prominent movements over the past decade were led by our youth. Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, Deferred Action for Deportation, and protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, each led by our youth, and each having had a tangible effect on the world. The children are leading the way, and they are leading now. They are organizing, they are communicating, and they are teaching. But they still need us. Our children need us now perhaps more than ever. And it's clear that our society, our world, needs them as well. Faith development is really a lifelong process. It's not something that you learn and then are done learning, unfortunately. Our children are spiritual beings. They come to us that way. They don't need us to teach them that piece. At every stage and age of childhood, kids do need adults in their lives who will encourage them to notice and respond to the presence of the Spirit in the world by whatever name you use. Children can rely on their families and religious leaders to introduce them to the stories of their faith tradition and to guide them in exploring connections between ancient tales of the world and the ordinary events of their everyday lives. What they need most from us are not definitive answers to faith questions, but the spiritual tools that they can use to build and interpret their own relationship to the Spirit. Jean Grasso Fitzpatrick writes that the greatest challenge we all face as spiritual nurturers is to become attuned to the young child's authentic spirituality, which, unlike our own, is still such an integrated part of life. A child's exuberant spirituality is reflected in just about everything that they do. Many theorists and those who have studied child development have written extensively about how young children, with their whole being, literally soak up everything in their environment, including the behavior and the attitudes of the adults around them. That's all of us. Educator Aileen Wolf suggests that our task as spiritual nurturers becomes easier when we realize that we don't have to instill spirituality in a child. We only have to protect it from being trampled and to nourish its natural growth. Kids come to us as spiritual beings, They were created from love, to be love, and to spread love. As adults, we play a key role in the faith development of our children. We play that role as parents and caregivers, as volunteers and teachers. We play that role with or without any official connection to the religious education program or to any particular child in the congregation. Someone is learning how to be a person by watching you. In faith communities, your children are learning how to be people of faith by watching you. Our children will absorb and learn from their environment, their experiences, and the behavior and the attitudes that we all possess here in this place of faith. Now, this learning is not one way. When we allow ourselves, we have so much to learn from our children too. At every age and stage of adulthood, adults need children to show us the extraordinary and the ordinary. We rely on children to offer unique and essential perspectives that as adults we have often forgotten and really can't rediscover on our own. When they pick up a worm, pull apart a daisy, or chase a butterfly, a child is showing us little miracles of life that we have long since taken for granted. Plus, Whitney Houston says that the laughter of children can remind us how we used to be, and I think she certainly got that part right. In our communities of faith, our children are learning that people need other people. That in our faith communities, people support each other in continuing to learn and grow forever. These are valuable lessons to learn at any age. For many of us, these are lessons that we will continue to learn and relearn over the course of a lifetime. For our children, knowing that the adults of the congregation are there to support their growth and learning, coupled with that deep sense of connection and trust, well, that can make all the difference. Don't underestimate the impact that your presence and modeling has on one another. I want to share this story with you. I love the Beatles, like the band, the music, the Beatles. And my love for the Beatles goes back for as long as I can remember. I remember singing songs with my mom as a toddler. I can still tell you the order of the Beatles albums in my dad's wooden crate in the basement that I would flip through. We sang Beatles songs in my school chorus, and I had posters all over my wall by junior high. In high school, I pored over the lyrics of those songs and read them like poetry. As a young adult, I heard a Beatles song being played in the very first Unitarian Universalist congregation I entered. I chose Beatles songs to be played at my wedding, and last summer I took my very first pilgrimage to Liverpool. I cannot remember a single time in my life that was not influenced by the music of the Beatles. So naturally, as a young parent, I introduced my children to the Beatles on the very days they were born. Haley was wrapped in a blanket that was designed by drawings that John Lennon had sketched for his own son, and she could identify each of the Fab Four before she turned 2. Her Yellow Submarine birthday party was a hit for people of all ages that year, I might add. My younger daughter, Abby Rose, may have been named after a certain album, and the framed album cover still hangs in her room 17 years later. Abby would often fall asleep to soft acoustic versions of Beatles songs, and she would look at children's books about these musicians. The weekly drive to church on Sunday mornings just happened to be timed perfectly with the Beatles Brunch radio show. My 2 children cannot remember a single time in their lives when the influence of the Beatles was not present. I promise this is relevant in some way to what we're talking about. 2 years ago, I attended an international interfaith conference focused on bringing the generations together more fully in congregational life. I was the only Unitarian Universalist present in this particular setting. One of the workshops that I attended was focused on our youngest members in the church, those under the age of 3. It was suggested that early childhood ministry was the most important ministry of the church that nobody ever talks about. You see, children learn more in those first 6 years of life than the rest of their entire lives combined. So for those of us in the room who have gone past the age of 6, we're not learning much now compared to what we did those first 6 years. If you think about it, our babies will learn how to use entire languages simply by being around us. Most of our children will learn to understand the languages that they are exposed to before they ever attend school or a class of any sort. In their first 4 years, on average, children will learn about 45,000 words, which seems like a pretty big number. Well, I wondered in this workshop how many of those words would be from the language of their faith. This is the time when developmentally we are most ripe for learning, those first few years. And it's the most common age group to be excluded not just from worship, but from congregational life events completely. And so I wondered what would happen if, as congregations, we raised our infants and our toddlers to be in worship with us on Sundays, where they were routinely exposed to that language, collecting those words of our faith. What would happen in congregations if we developed religious literacy right from the start, so that our children never remembered a time when they were not influenced by or a part of our community of faith? In this conference, I listened to my interfaith colleagues share stories of how they had welcomed and ministered to the youngest among them. I heard story after story of what it had meant to have babies and toddlers and small children, not just in worship, but in small group ministry, fellowship, social justice, and learning as well. Now, I've been attending these interfaith gatherings for over a dozen years at this point, and over the years we have had so many similar challenges and goals in bringing our generations together more fully. But this particular year, for the very first time, I wept. I wept because a dozen years later, our interfaith colleagues had made marked progress where ours had been minimal at best. I wept because when I shared that the norm in Unitarian Universalism was to have our youngest in the nursery while our school-aged children were with us for 10 or 15 minutes of worship each week, try as they may, our interfaith partners could not disguise their looks of absolute disbelief, and they tried. Being part of any religious community is work. It's work to move beyond our own individual needs and wants and preferences to really embrace that power of community and of we. It's work that belongs to each and every one of us. It's the work of journeying together. It's the work of our shared faith. Our religious education programs are one piece of the puzzle. I like to call it the unspoken trinity. If trinity is a trigger word for you, you can call it a triangle. Religious education programs are important and valuable, but alone they are not enough. Our religious education programs need to be connected to the other two pieces of the triangle. Connection to the congregation as a whole, and faith development at home. The religious education program can only do its job and have a lasting impact when the other two pieces are also present. Let me share this story with you. When my unchurched and non-religious mother met with my father's childhood priest before they got married, she was 17 years old. To become married in the Catholic Church, there were some promises that she had to make. One of those promises was the promise to raise any future children Catholic. And so at the age of 17, the intention was set that day in the rectory of St. Pat's Church that if they ever had children someday, and they did, I would be Catholic. But make no mistake about it, the responsibility would lay squarely with my father. Because while my parents had shared intentions, the actions taken would certainly have to be the responsibility of my Catholic dad. Because between the two of them, he was clearly the resident expert, not just on Catholicism, but on anything religious, period. When my own parents were growing up in the 1950s and 60s, in order to meet the growing demand of baby boomers in the United States, tens of thousands of new schools were being built in this country. No more one-room schoolhouses. Modern schools were being built across the country. And when I say modern, I mean they were fitted with chalkboards, linoleum floors, and nice, neat rows of desks for children in age-segregated classrooms. And it didn't take long for churches of many denominations to follow suit. Modeled after those public schools, soon there were brightly colored religious education wings being built and added on to sanctuaries. Some of them had chalkboards, linoleum floors, and those desks in those age-segregated classrooms. While moving into bigger and more modern public schools generated larger and more modern staffing. Soon there were departments and specializations for teachers. You weren't just a teacher anymore. You taught a specific subject for a specific age group of children. And all of these new approaches to math and science and readings were being rolled out, and parents were encouraged to leave that to the professionals. The underlying message in this time was that parents were to drop off and pick up their kids at school on time, preferably, volunteer for the PTA or bring cookies, and just leave the rest to the professionals. The message found its way into our congregations as well. Soon, every age-segregated class in our religious education wings came with a teacher or two to teach topics that our parents were no longer deemed qualified to teach. Parents were again encouraged to drop off and pick up their kids on time, maybe bring a snack. But much of the education of our children was outsourced to professionals, and their religious education was outsourced to very dedicated volunteers. This weekly separation of children and adults actually created an anti-family space where parents rarely talked to their children about matters of faith. Children were seldom exposed to the stories of their elders, and everyone had very different experiences on Sunday mornings in different parts of the building. That was almost 60 years ago. The long-term and unintended consequence of this strategy brought us a generation of young people who had no connection to their faith or congregation outside of Sunday school. And that generation brought us the next generation with the highest number of non-religious folks in our history, many of whom are young parents in society today. By segregating our kids out of worship and the life of the congregation, we never really assimilated them into the fullness of our faith. They had no touch points, no experiences. They had no connection with the main worship service, its liturgy, its music, its space, you. And so once they finished with their RE program or graduated from the youth group, they left the church. And in Unitarian Universalism, that has looked like roughly 88% of our kids who have left the faith after completing religious education, a number that has not budged in nearly 15 years. Now, my home church, that Catholic one that I told you about, expected children and youth and people of every age to be in worship together every week. We didn't get to church every Sunday in my family. My dad worked a lot, and there was absolutely no way my mom was going to enter that unknown space and culture with my brother and I. And religion was my dad's job. And in the raising of a young family, I have to say, it just didn't rise to the top of the priority list on most days. My dad was working what felt like 5 million hours a week, and my mom was the ultimate stay-at-home parent. No, my religious education was left to the volunteer teachers at the Parish of the Resurrection. And it took place primarily in classrooms that flanked the parish's indoor basketball court, and it happened on Monday nights. My mom dropped me off and picked me up each and every Monday with good intentions, expecting that the volunteers inside that building would teach me all there was to know about this faith that was given to me when I was born. Of the two people who could have had the biggest impact on my faith development, one was working outside the home for 5 million hours a week, and the other was unchurched and non-religious. We didn't have a dinner time prayer. We didn't read from the Bible or discuss scripture. We didn't have any spiritual practices, religious traditions, rituals, any of that. My dad wasn't on any committees, and he wasn't particularly involved in the life of the congregation aside from those Sundays he made it to church. I did know religion was important to him, and I did know that he gave money to his church every week. But I also knew that when I was 8 years old and started playing soccer, the soccer field would become the place where my family would spend time on Sundays until I graduated high school. Now, my parents had good intentions. They had me baptized, they signed me up for their religious education classes, and they made sure I got there every single week until I graduated high school. The problem is not one of intent, not for my parents and not for most of our congregations. Most did everything they could to Sunday school their children, nurture their youth, and invite young families into congregational life. But good intentions aside, the faith that we taught somehow failed to reach and teach them. For the past 60 years now, since embracing the age-segregated education structure of our public schools, most of our churches have rarely exposed children to the wisdom, depth, and stories of their elders on a regular basis. Now, don't forget, religious education programs are just one piece of that trinity. Across denominations, there is statistical evidence that confirms that parents are the primary influence and have the most significant impact on the faith development of their children. What if, as a denomination, we started to take that seriously? The research-based fact that parents are indeed the primary educators in the faith, and our efforts as a congregation were spent supporting and utilizing this primary influence. Does this mean to suggest that parents should take on the burden of teaching a systematic and comprehensive curriculum of Unitarian Universalism? No, thank you. There is a place in the congregation for age-specific faith learning. But without the primary influence of parents, all of that congregational effort has little or no traction. In my case, I missed out on a significant parental influence and did not have any connections to the adults in the congregation. How I became called to religious work remains the biggest mystery in our family. Statistically, it should not have happened. As congregations, this is our responsibility. It's part of the promise and the intention that we share with our families when they bring their children here to be dedicated and blessed. It's the intention we share time and time again when we dedicate and welcome new families into our community. Friends, if the children are our future, then I am here to say that the future is upon us. We need each other desperately in our faith communities. We need to show up for each other here and now. Our work and our call is to support the faith development, the spiritual journey, the lifelong learning of every person in our congregations. My home has 2 generations of women who cannot remember a single time in their lives when the Beatles did not provide the soundtrack to our lives. I learned how to appreciate and love the Beatles by watching my parents, and my children learned the same by watching me. As we consider the future of faith formation and the future of Unitarian Universalism, I pray that the next 2 generations will learn how to be people of faith, Unitarian Universalists even, by the examples that we provide. I pray that they will not be able to remember a single time in their lives that did not include the music and words of this faith, the scent of flickering candles, a deep sense of connection and trust, the embrace of community, and the experience of being known and loved. May it be so.
Thank you, Kim, for that inspiring and insightful message. Every week we have an opportunity to practice our values through the sharing of our resources. Our pledges are at the core of our spiritual practice of generosity. In addition, the church shares half of all the non-pledged cash in the offering plate with a community organization. In this way, we commit our resources in line with our belief that this congregation is interdependent with the world beyond these walls. Today, we share the plate with the Feast of Crispian, Shakespeare with veterans. May the practice of giving bring us joy. The offering will now be gratefully accepted.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join me in our responsive reading, which can be found in your order of service. From the busyness of every day, we gather once a week to remember who we are, to dream of who we might become.
We travel this road together.
As companions on this journey, we share the milestones we meet along the way. Individual moments of joy and sorrow become shared moments of comfort and celebration.
We travel this road together.
We share this journey across differences of belief and opinion because we value diversity and because we care for one another.
We travel this road together.
Today, as we take the next steps, let us notice our fellow travelers, the burdens that they carry, the songs that inspire their hearts.
We travel this road together.
As we gather in beloved community, let us open the holy havens of our hearts. Let us share the sacred places of our souls, for we are pilgrims who share a common path.
We travel this road together.
And thank you to Tess Bomberg for writing that reading for us. Please join me in singing our final hymn, number 131, Love Will Guide Us.